Good evening, community. I hope to find you in the best way, as always, for this compilation. One very close to Tales of the Night. And it is that tonight's stories have nuns as protagonists or as the main theme. Without further ado, we ask you not to be suggestible to the stories you will hear next. If there's a child out there, please don't listen alone. Do it, if there's no way to convince you not to, in the company of an adult, because there's no turning back. You're already listening to Tales of the Night. My story takes place in that same church in Tijuana that one of the most famous stories of this program talks about. I lived there for a while when I was a child, although several years before what they tell happened, in the 80s. I remember that field between the church and the convent where they let us play soccer. I also remember how the nuns would give you water if you approached to ask for it. They were very good to us. Once I stayed playing alone for a while after, I didn't feel like going back home because of problems there. I ended up kicking the ball with a boy who was alone there too, waiting for his parents who were with the priest. It got dark when we couldn't play anymore. We were tired and full of dirt, and although we shouldn't have been there anymore, because they always told us not to stay after it got dark, I told him to accompany me to the convent door to ask the nuns for water, but before I could knock on the door, it opened. A very old nun asked us what we needed. She was dressed differently from the ones I always saw there, and I assumed she must be the Mother Superior. We asked for water. She told us to wait there. She came back after a moment with 2 little clay pots with very fresh water. It felt so good. It filled us up so much that I even remember thinking, if she hadn't given us holy water. We returned the 2 pots and she closed the door. I thought that surely, at that hour, most of the nuns would have gone to sleep. The boy's parents came out of the church and called him. It was already very dark and I had no more excuses to be outside. So finally it was time to go back home. They punished me for coming home late. I didn't go back to the church to play soccer until almost a week later. Again it got dark. Everyone left, but I didn't want to go back home. I sat on the sidewalk and although I wasn't thirsty, I thought about that water from the nuns, how fresh it was, how good it had made me feel. Taking advantage of their kindness, I went to knock again to ask them for some water, but no one came out. I rang the bell again, and nothing. Then, behind me, in the middle of the dark field where we played, I saw a silhouette approaching. It was a nun, one I already knew, who always seemed to be angry, who scared me. She asked me what I was doing knocking at those hours in a rather aggressive tone. I told her I just wanted some water. She replied that at that hour they couldn't give it to me, that they were all asleep. Only she was still outside resolving some pending matters, but that it was very rude of me to go knocking so late. I told her that days before someone had answered the door at that hour and had given me water. She was about to close the door in my face when I said that, but she stopped. She opened again to ask me if I was telling the truth. I told her yes. She asked me who had opened and I could only describe the elderly nun and how she was dressed. She smiled for just an instant. At the same time her eyes became teary. Then she returned to her usual marked face. She told me there was no nun like the one I described, that I shouldn't knock so late again. That was the only thing I got to see. But then I learned that on that first night, I had had contact with something very, very strange. In those times, several of the children who went to play there had seen that nun whose attire was from another era at night, observing them from the darkness. That legend of the nun who appeared at night was well known. That's why no one stayed there once the sun went down. But of all the people I knew there, that boy I only saw that one time and I were the only ones who had contact with her, who even drank from the water she offered us. This is my story. or rather my grandfather's story. When I discovered Tales of the Night back in late 2020, my grandfather had just died of COVID. It was hard for everyone, but just as he lived his whole life on his own terms, that's how he left. Instead of going to a hospital where people entered never to return at a time when not even bodies were returned to families, he told his children he would go to the village, to his house. That house abandoned for so long, but that was still waiting for him. He died there. We buried him there. Being in the village, in that house, I remembered one of the stories my grandfather always told us. In his life, he only had 2 encounters with the paranormal. But with those, as he said, those would be enough. Since I've been listening to Tales of the Night, I've had the idea of sharing this with you. And look, 4 years later, I barely feel strong enough to talk about my grandfather, about what he experienced. The story goes back to his childhood, right next to the house I knew, where he lived. Afterwards, he spent his childhood in an adobe house, of which only a mark on the ground remains. If the village is small now, back then it was just a handful of houses scattered in that huge plain, surrounded by mountains. When the land couldn't be worked, his father would go to the city where he worked in construction. And in one of those seasons when his mother was left in charge of my grandfather, 7 years old, his older brother of 9, and the younger brother who was barely a year old, this story happens. The baby was called Anastasio. Since he was born, he had been weak and sick. At 7 months, he was born in a delivery that almost took him and his mother to the grave. My grandfather remembered that it took time for him and his sister to meet him, as they spent a month in the city hospital. Sick, always sick, poor Anastasio. My grandfather said that this time when his father left to work in the city, knowing he would be gone for weeks before returning, he hugged Anastasio and told him he loved him very much, to be strong. He knew he was sick and that every time he left, there would be a chance of not seeing him again. One afternoon, my grandfather was playing with his dog near his house when he noticed that his sister, who was in the yard, suddenly ran inside, as if someone had called her. Then she peeked out to tell him to come in too, but she didn't say why. She didn't even call him with swear words as she always spoke to him. My grandfather, that little boy who already understood these signs, walked sadly, obeying, knowing that something terrible had happened. He could feel it, not in his heart, as they say. He felt it in his stomach, with a pain that suddenly hit him. When he approached, his sister's teary eyes told him everything. Anastasio died at 3:30 in the afternoon. There was nothing more to do. His mother had fed him and hugged him. They fell asleep in that chair he liked, where the sun seeped through the window. Suddenly the little boy gave a long sigh and left. He fell asleep. His mother tried to wake him up, but she couldn't anymore. There was no hospital in that village, nor in the next one, nor in the next one, nor in the next one. She would have to go all the way to the city to notify the child's father and, by the way, the authorities. But when the children came in to see their brother, their mother had already changed him. She had him well dressed in the clothes they had bought to take him to be baptized. My grandfather was very sad. The pain in his stomach wouldn't leave him. Their mother told them she would walk to the next village, where in an hour a bus would leave for the city. If she hurried, she could catch it. My grandfather thought about how much they missed the little donkey. He loved it very much and it used to take them here and there, but they had to sell it when Anastasio was born. Their mother asked them very much to take care of their brother, the little body, not to go out at all, not to tell anyone. She didn't want people to come to see him, just out of morbid curiosity. She asked them to take good care of him until she returned with their father. They covered him with a little blanket, and my grandfather and his sister sat at the entrance of the house while they watched their mother take the path through that dry, white land that burned even when it wasn't hot. That first hour of waiting went by slowly. They didn't know what to do. Just walking around the house, it seemed that that little blanket on the bed stung their eyes, but they didn't want to see him anymore. Every time he turned, my grandfather's stomach hurt more. Every time they saw him, they remembered that they wouldn't hear him anymore. Crying around the house, pulling the dog's tail who always turned and bared his teeth, as if the child would understand. He never did anything to him. That dog was very noble. My grandfather got lost in memories, and that's how a little bit of the sadness went away. His sister started cleaning the whole house, with the excuse that their father was coming back. She wanted him to find it clean, but it seemed more like that was her way of not thinking, of leaving the sadness for later, when she didn't have the worry. When it was getting dark, they both heard something. The cry of a baby that seemed to come from far away. They looked out to the path and saw nothing. The nearest houses were so far away that only the first one could be seen. It was starting to get dark. You could barely see the yellow glow coming out of that window. They thought that perhaps the wind had brought that cry from afar. It happened sometimes, but there were no small babies in the village, at least not that they knew of. The dog went walking over there with curiosity, as if following the cry. He always did that. He would go around the village, get someone to give him something to eat and come back. He had learned to do it since Anastasio was born and they didn't have much to eat, as if it were his way of helping. Neither of the two children wanted to say out loud that the cry sounded like Anastasio. They heard it again several times and started talking to each other to stop hearing it, to fill their ears with something else. They heated up the soup that no one ate at lunchtime when the child had died. My grandfather's sister settled into the chair facing the window to see the entrance of the house. It was about to be 10 o'clock, but maybe, she thought, her mother would be about to return, her father or the dog, who knows where he was. Both of their hearts raced. Someone knocked hard on the door suddenly. His sister was especially scared, because where she was, she had to see anyone who came in. And besides, there in the village, people didn't come in to knock. They shouted from outside, from the street. They both approached the door to ask who it was. Who was there? "I've come to see the child," said a voice outside. It sounded very far away. "For what or who sent you?" My grandfather answered gruffly from childhood. "I've come to see the child," the voice said again in exactly the same tone. My grandfather's sister went to the window to try to see outside. The only thing she managed to notice was a habit, like that of a nun. She couldn't see her face. "It's a little nun," she told my grandfather and put her hands on the door latch, but my grandfather stopped her. He asked her why a nun would be there. His sister told him that maybe their mother had found her on the way, that she had sent her to help them or to baptize Anastasio. "No, wait, don't open it," my grandfather told her. His sister stopped and asked again, "Who sent you, mother? Did you meet my mother?" "I've come to see the child." They both knew it sounded strange, and my grandfather's sister had to decide. She told my grandfather to go to the little bed with the little body. Then she told the nun through the door to come back later, that they couldn't open for her, especially if they didn't know who sent her. "I'll be back soon. I'll be back soon." My grandfather said they stopped feeling her out there, as if that feeling of anguish she brought with her had suddenly gone. My grandfather peeked out the window. No one could be seen outside anymore, but not on the path either. Neither side. Where would that dog be, damn it, when it was needed the most? He was noble, but lazy, the bastard. They opened the door slowly. My grandfather whistled for the dog. Wherever he was, he always seemed to hear him and came back. They both walked around the little house. They checked the little corral. There was only a goat and a hen with 3 chicks left there. When Anastasio was born, they ate the animals that were left, the ones they hadn't been able to sell. They only left those. They went back inside. They lit some candles for the child. They were used to walking around in the darkness, but that night they didn't want to do it. The old clock on the wall struck 11. They knocked again, this time with a violence that shook the latch, almost knocking it down.
"I've come to see the child,"
said that voice, now angry. They both looked out the window. There was the nun in darkness again without letting her face be seen. "Go away. Why do you come knocking like this at our house? Who do you think you are?" my grandfather's sister said.
"I've come to see the child,"
said that voice while seeming to shake the door, as if taking it with both hands with the intention of ripping it off. The worst thing is that it seemed she would be capable of doing it if she pulled with a little more force. The only thing they had inside to defend themselves, there in the little house, was a blunt machete and the handleless knife their mother used. They both gripped a weapon tightly in their little hands.
"I'll be back soon. I'll be back soon,"
said the voice. They both ran to look out. They did it carefully, fearing she would see them. The nun stood at the entrance. She looked both ways down the path. Then she turned back to the house. There, the two children quickly ducked down before she saw them. They didn't manage to see her face. "And if it's a real nun? And if we're making her angry? Won't they take us to hell for not obeying her?" my grandfather said, now doubting. But his sister told him no, to hold on. That surely their mother was almost here. There was something very strange about that woman approaching. It reminded his sister of that time when her friend told her that in the village it was heard that La Llorona had passed by. There at the house they didn't hear her. But something strange they did feel. They say that even people who can't see ghosts can feel them. My grandfather, even as a very old man, continued with that belief. Every time he talked to me about my anxiety, he told me to light Palo Santo in my house, that it was because there were ghosts nearby. The children were afraid that the nun would return at any moment, that she would arrive before their parents. My grandfather ran out to the corral to look for an axe. His sister waited for him at the door, and then they barred it again and put a piece of furniture in front. Before they knew it, another hour had passed them by. The clock struck midnight. Something was coming towards the house. The banging on the door shook it, made the bolt jump, pushed the furniture, and shook the house so much that adobe dust began to fall.
"I've come for the child,"
said the voice. They had no choice but to start praying. The two children recited all the prayers they knew. They watched as the door moved, how it shook. It really looked like that woman was going to tear it off as if it were a flower petal, at any moment. The two of them covered Anastasio's body with their own. No matter what happened, they weren't going to let him be taken. No one was going to touch him.
"I'll be right back. I'll be right back."
It seemed like she was moving away again. They could both feel it. The grandfather had put his little hands over his face and didn't dare to look. His sister approached the window. He says she screamed, that she screamed in such a horrible way that he felt like his soul was leaving his body. He removed his hands from his eyes. He was far from the window, but he managed to see what had made her scream like that. The nun was on the road, floating meters above the ground, with her head to one side, bent below her neck. He closed his eyes again. He started to cry. His sister came up to him and told him that she had already left. "Listen to me carefully. You have to be brave, little brother. I'm going to run to the neighbors. I think she's gone the other way. I'm going to wake them up, scream, and ask for help. If she comes back again, she'll get in. I have to go and come back before she returns." My grandfather knew that what his sister was saying wasn't the most sensible thing. Yes, someone had to go out, run, and get help, but it couldn't be her. She could barely walk properly. Much less would she be able to escape if the nun followed her. He knew he had to go, but she wouldn't let him. He put on his sandals and told her to get ready in case she had to run too. They moved the furniture away from the door. My grandfather told her he would open it, that she should get ready. that he would count to 3 for her to run out. But as soon as he opened the door, he ran out like a bat out of hell, slamming the door behind him while shouting at his sister, "Close it, close it, close it." He managed to hear his sister respond with a curse. He ran out onto the road. It was very cold. The air burned his nose, scratched his face, and there she was, the nun. He could hear her nearby. He felt she was behind him. He imagined her floating towards him along the road, but he didn't dare to look. He kept running, breathing through his mouth, running as fast as he could. Beside him, something moved among the branches. He barely managed to turn, saw a black blur running parallel to him through the bushes, and suddenly, there were no more branches, and it entered the road. It ran towards him, bit his hand, almost knocking him down. His dog, his blessed dog, who knows where it had been. But now it was running with him. Now he wasn't alone. The dog would suddenly stop. It barked backwards, barked at something. Then it whined in fear and ran back to the grandfather. Finally, they reached the neighbor's house. He screamed and knocked on the door. The dog's barks also helped wake them up. He says they also couldn't have ignored that crying that could be heard that night. The neighbors woke up alarmed and let him in. The grandfather told them that there was something in his house, that Anastasio had died in the afternoon, that he and his sister were alone, and that something had come for the body. "Is that what's out there?" the man asked him. My grandfather said yes. The neighbor and his eldest son, a boy of about 14, got ready to go out, took a shotgun. My grandfather wanted to go with them, but they wouldn't let him. The lady stayed to look after him, and they put him to bed to try to sleep. He heard his dog barking in the distance. The neighbors knew the dog well too and took it with them. All help seemed necessary on a night as hellish as that one. They gave him tea that made him fall asleep after a while. Deeply asleep. He was awakened by the door. The lady got up, the son talking to her at the door. It was dawn. They went to wake my grandfather. The lady told him they were waiting for him at his house. They put a jacket on him that was too big and walked there. The sun hadn't risen yet, but it was already getting light. At his house was the neighbor. His sister was there. His mother and father were there. He ran to hug him. It was clear that he had also cried all night. My grandfather scanned the house with his eyes without saying anything. Anastasio's body was fine. His sister was sitting on the floor, her face between her knees, very tired. The dog by her side, breathing heavily with its tongue out. They were illuminated by the first ray of sun that was already coming through the window. He noticed that there was a shotgun mark on the door. He thought of the neighbor and turned to look at him. He had marked dark circles under his eyes and skin whiter than paper, with a lost gaze. They all took Anastasio together to the church in the neighboring town to baptize him, to have his mass. Then they went to bury him. My grandfather remembered that between his father and the neighbor, they put heavy stones on the little wooden box in which they buried him. There wasn't enough for a coffin. They put them as if to prevent anyone from taking him out. He remembered that afterwards they would go every week to visit the grave, to check that it was intact. His sister never told him what happened that night. He doesn't know if they made her swear not to do it, or if she was trying to protect him. The poor girl died 4 years later. He always told this story visibly sad. My grandfather was overcome by nostalgia, the memory of Anastasio, of his sister. Some in the family say that's why he returned to the village when he found out he had COVID, that he went to check the grave one last time. Thank you for continuing here, community. I hope you're enjoying this episode, and if so, you know what to do. Please leave us a comment, an opinion, or a 5-star rating depending on where you listen to us. As always, we emphasize that this is the best way to help this project continue. We end this episode with one of the stories I brought from a recent trip to Spain. I wanted to include it in a compilation of purely Spanish stories, but I think it goes very well with the theme of this episode. So here it goes. Keep listening to Tales of the Night. This is a legend from my parents' village, a place of which not much remains. Since my parents were children, they knew about the abandoned convent. It was said to have been inhabited by poor Clare nuns in the last century. It was still administered by the church, but now with a very private purpose. Nobody knew exactly why. The truth is that when someone in the village was very sick, terminally ill, they would take them there. There was apparently an image that they considered miraculous. When my parents were in their teens, something happened. A major scandal. In the center of the village, 2 thieves appeared crying, begging for forgiveness. No one knew yet what they had done, but they were apprehended anyway to begin the investigations. There were people chasing them, and it was people from the church. Then the truth was known. Not only what they had done, but also what they kept in that convent, what they allowed only associates to visit. The body of a nun, mummified, preserved inexplicably in excellent condition. The rest of the nuns had abandoned the home long ago, but they left her there. She was miraculous, and it was said that the Vatican's investigation to verify it was underway. That nun kept something in her chest, between her hands, a gold cross encrusted with precious stones, a gift from her parents when she took her vows. It was said that she came from a noble, impressively rich family. Among the few people who had seen it, mostly relatives of the sick, word began to spread about the jewels she kept, each time exaggerating it more. The rumor finally reached the ears of 2 petty thieves from a neighboring village. They kept watch near the place to learn the movements. Although back then, in a village like that, there was no need to worry about security. They entered one night and searched everywhere until they reached the holy nun. They opened the large glass coffin where she rested and tore off the jewel. Just one. It wasn't like in the stories they ended up hearing. However, of course, it was a good loot. But they were seen as they left, chased until they managed to flee the village. But instead of returning to theirs, where they knew they might be waiting for them, they decided to run to the hills, wait, and spend the night there. They would see later how to return and where. They hadn't made a fire to avoid signaling their whereabouts. They slept in a small cave they already knew, just a couple of meters, with a very small entrance but enough to hide from the sight of their pursuers, or from the cold. In the middle of the night, something woke them up. They opened their eyes to see a figure standing at the entrance of the cave, the silhouette of a nun. The 2 of them were completely frozen with horror, and the silhouette at the entrance lowered from between her arms an enormous stone impossible for any human to carry. With a dry thud, she dropped it, closing the entrance to the cave, their only way out. The 2 began to scream, to beg for forgiveness. They screamed and destroyed their nails and fingers trying to scratch around that huge stone. But they couldn't even stretch out. They were lying next to the entrance, without enough space to push with their legs and move it. Someone moved it suddenly, when they were already full of blood and fear. When they had accepted their fate, death, hell, it was 2 merchants who had avoided the road precisely because of the news of 2 thieves who had been lurking there for some time. With the help of a rope and their horse, they all moved that stone. The thieves didn't even say thank you. They ran back to the village to return the cross. But their evil actions had an irreparable consequence, as the nun's body disappeared, and with it the stories that were told of her miracles. My parents said that the story was soon hidden, that it was somewhat embarrassing for the people of the village, especially because locking someone alive in a cave, even if they were thieves, wasn't exactly the actions of a saint. Among the children of the village, it was said that if you went out very late from home, the nun would appear to not let you return. But this and everything perhaps was formed in the legend. Thank you for sharing it. Be careful today on your way back home. If you return late, the nun might appear there still seeking revenge.